All right, I believe we are now recording. We had such high interest in this program tonight that we were not able to accept all registration. So we told people we would video it and put it up on our YouTube channel sometime in the next week. And I'm guessing that some people have alternate plans for this evening as well that we didn't know about when this program was scheduled. So we will record this and have it available sometime in this week. So on September 19th, this past week and a half ago or so, the Libertyville-Mundelein Historical Society launched an online self-guided walking tour of the downtown buildings that we call Libertyville's Historic Milwaukee Avenue. It starts from goes from about Newberry Avenue on the north to Maple Avenue on the south, starting in Cook Park. We based on the number of buildings on a 2016 Libertyville Historic Preservation Commission study. And based on looking at that, we identified 40 buildings between Newberry and Maple and went ahead and started researching them this past spring. The four of us, myself, Jenny, Lori, Heather, and Melissa, are just 4 of the 10 people that did the research on the buildings. We split them up and everyone did about 3 to 5 buildings. And we are going to tell you about a couple of the buildings that we individually researched. So we're going to cover about 8 buildings of the 40 tonight. And at the end of the presentation, we will tell you how you can get to the online tour. And then you can either take that while walking around downtown, or you can take it from the comfort of your house as well. Our resources for this were the Cook Library's local history collection, as well as the Historical Society's collection, and a lot of old newspaper digging. All right. So we are going to cover 8 buildings. I'm going to turn it over to Lori to kick off the tour. And Heather and Melissa, if you would go off video, and I will spotlight Lori, see if that all works. All right, let me get off video as well. Hold on just a second.
Right. Thank you, Jenny. I'm Lori Stein. I'll kick us off today. And our first stop is the building at 355 North Milwaukee Avenue on the southwest corner of Milwaukee and Church Street, the current home to Conscious Cup. Move to the next slide here. And this building was constructed in 1896 by James Triggs. It's a commercial block building with several Queen Anne style architectural features, including the distinctive bay windows and corner turret. And over the past 125 years, it's been home to a range of businesses, largely in the categories of food or transport. So it's fitting that its first role, as you can see, falls under both themes. It was built to house the Libertyville Hotel. So in the wake of the 1895 fire across the street on the east side of Milwaukee Avenue, downtown was developed and redeveloped, in this case, very quickly. And James Triggs put up this red brick building in 1896, and by summer of 1897, Libertyville Hotel opened for business. So Triggs himself was part of a very large family connection who had come to Lake County from England in the mid-1800s. And he and his many various cousins and siblings numbered among some of the most prominent merchants of Libertyville at the time. So his hope with the hotel was to draw summer visitors from Chicago, including cyclists, as you can see in the ad on the top right, along with locals to dine. And according to the local newspaper, the hotel had 15 large bedrooms, a parlor on the second floor, and then a saloon and dining room featuring an ice box, of course, and a cigar case on the first floor. And then the building was also, quote, lighted with electricity. So that was important. To cater to the summer guests, it offered carriages in the adjacent stable to those who wanted to tour nearby lakes, and also provided a place to drink the famed local mineral spring water, which was one of Libertyville's claims to fame at the time. So over the course of the 20 plus years the building served as a hotel, it was remodeled several times, most notably in 1902 to add some essentials that were left out in the initial plan, which namely was, quote, baths, closets, and lavatories. All right, next slide here. So by 1919, the hotel had closed and the building was then known as the Kennedy Building. You can see it circled in red and then the map there. And at that time, it was divided into a first floor retail with multiple storefronts and then second floor apartments and offices. So in 1919, Garrett Wilson and Carl Ohm opened a Ford and Lincoln agency here, which featured car sales, a service station, auto supplies, and tires. You can see their advertisement pictured in the center. Then in 1925, the brand new Libertyville Trust and Savings Bank, which is advertised on the right there, opened in this building alongside the Ford agency. And these quarters were always intended to be temporary for the bank, which moved across the street to the brand new public service building when it was finished in 1928. Then one more early tenant from 1932 to 1948, Harriet Beauty Supply was on the south side of the building. So you can see a small ad from Harriet Beauty Supply from the telephone directory on top there. So it was run by Harriet Matthews and it specialized in the permanent wave style popular at the time in the 30s, but also offered electrovac treatments for skin and scalp. So a place not to be missed. Right. So moving into the middle of the 1900s here, by about 1940, the corner half of the building housed an ice cream shop and cafe. And under various proprietors, this would remain there into the 1970s. So the proprietors changed through the decade. There was Young's, Dairy Maid, Sunshine's. And in 1948, Sunshine Monroe, proprietor of Sunshine's, sold the store to Mr. and Mrs. Russell Proctor, who renamed it Proctor's Chatterbox. So you can see the advertisement there. And Proctor's became a favorite teen hangout in the 50s. So according to the memories of Bud and Donald Boyd, quote, its jukebox had all the latest hits to accompany the thick malteds at 15 cents and the huge banana splits that went for 25 cents. So a hop in place. Then about 1950, the Libertyville Chamber of Commerce, which had been founded in 1946, but by 1950 already had over 130 members, the Chamber of Commerce relocated its office to the south half of the building, seen at left in the photo there. Also sometime in the 1950s, the corner turret was removed. You can see that too in the photo in the upper right. And in 1995, the turret was restored during a renovation. Next slide. Okay, moving into more recent memory, Lake County Auto Parts inhabited part of the building in the 60s and 70s. Then later into the 1990s, it was APS Auto Parts. Then that place on the corner was perhaps the most aptly named in a series of several restaurants located on the corner, also including Big Red's, which you can see in the photo. Then in 2009, so much more recently, Love and Oven Cakery launched its first branch location here at the site. Of course, they just closed last year, making way for the current tenant, Conscious Cup, in early 2020. Okay, so moving right along on our brief tour here, we'll move north across Cook Park on Milwaukee Avenue for our next stops, near the north corner of Milwaukee and Cook. So here we have two buildings related to the Lake County Bank. So we have 501 to 505 and 507 North Milwaukee Avenue, which are home today to the Picnic Basket and Libertyville Bank and Trust. So in 1892, prominent members of the Libertyville business community, including the Parkhurst, Wright, and Diamond families, perhaps familiar names, formed the first bank in town. And then 2 years later, this building was constructed to house it. So you can see that at the time, the building had more of a Queen Anne facade, including a turret like the hotel building to the south. So over the years, the facade has been altered a number of times. The new bank fulfilled a need in the growing community, and by 1898, deposits averaged over $100,000, and the services of the bank had expanded to include farm loans, insurance policies, and real estate transactions, so all important things. Then in 1903, it was incorporated as the Lake County National Bank of Libertyville. So continuing to flourish, even with a competitor across the street. In 1922, the bank decided to construct a new state-of-the-art facility on land it acquired next door to the north. So before that new bank was built, though, there had been previous inhabitants of the lot next door. 3 small wood frame business buildings had stood on the site since at least the 1890s. And they housed, from south to north, a tailor shop, Charles Kaiser's harness shop, and the third, by 1909, had Libertyville's first permanent movie theater, the Lyric Theater, which was operated by J.T. Robertson. You can see the sign from the Lyric Theater pictured at the left. So the Lake County National Bank purchased the property from Mr. Kaiser of the harness shop in 1920, and the frame buildings on the site were demolished. And so the new state-of-the-art building cost between $60,000 and $70,000. It had a steel and concrete frame and brick exterior trimmed with terracotta, and had the added benefit of being, quote, fireproof. So the classical revival style, which is very apparent in the photo, had a full height portico, triangular pediment, fluted columns, an entrance surrounded by entablature. So this was all very popular in style at the time for banks. It emphasized their civic role and as well as sort of their longevity and security. So now we can see the interior, which was no less impressive, according to the Libertyville Independent newspaper. Quote, massive fire and burglar-proof safe deposit vaults have been installed, all being protected by the latest electric alarm devices. There are splendid waiting and restrooms for gentlemen and ladies, tastefully furnished with all that goes to make the place inviting. So here folks from the country may meet their friends, rest from their shopping, and otherwise make use of the facilities offered by the bank. So the bank continued to flourish in its new home until, of course, the Great Depression struck, which put financial institutions everywhere, small and large, under tremendous strain. And so in 1933, this bank, Lake County National Bank, and its former competitor, the First National Bank of Libertyville, which was across the street, merged, combined their assets, and formed the first Lake County National Bank, which was housed in this building. Then after World War II, the facility underwent a significant renovation with an all-important drive-up window added in the alley to the north. However, as automobiles grew even larger and more numerous and Milwaukee Avenue grew busier, the narrow alley to the north became something of a traffic hazard for the cars trying to pull out onto the street. And so in part because of this, the First Lake County National Bank chose to leave this site in 1968 and build a new building around the corner at Cook and Brainerd. So of course, several name changes and acquisitions later, this institution still operates in the community now as Chase Bank at that location. Okay, so I promised that the slide you see here shows the same 2 buildings that I've been discussing, although here they're sort of nearly unrecognizable from their banking days, but perhaps more familiar to some of your memories today. So in 1969, after the bank left, Modine Manufacturing Company, which is a thermal manufacturing company based out of Racine, opened business offices in the former bank building. So Modine had been founded in 1916. They built radiators for tractors and automobiles. But by the 1960s had grown to have 10 manufacturing plants across the country for all sorts of heat transfer devices. So these were their offices. And the company really undertook a significant renovation of this building, really rendering the facade sort of unrecognizable with the aluminum front finish in the modernist style that you see here. And the first bank building on the corner had also by then been significantly altered with a faux English Tudor stucco exterior. Then in the mid-1980s, Don and Shirley Mayworm, who ran a healthcare publishing company, acquired the building and restored many of its classical architectural elements, removing that modernist facade. So they had offices on the second floor, and then the first floor became the Heritage Galleria, seen here, which housed several arts-related shops and businesses. So the building finally came full circle back to finances in 1995. Unfortunately, the vaults in the basement were found to be left unchanged when it was acquired by Wintrust to serve as a new location for one of their Chicago suburban community banks, known as Libertyville Bank and Trust. Okay, now I will pass it back to Jenny to move further north on Milwaukee.
Okay, there we go. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can. There we go. All right. Am I on the screen now? I think so. All right. I think I need to press one more button. Hold on just a second. There we go. Okay. All right. So we're going to move down the street just a little bit to 535 to 541 North Milwaukee Avenue. Today, that building is home to Charles and Minerva and Touche Salon on the northern side, and Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory on the, other way, Charles and Minerva and Touche on the south side, and Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory on the north side. When they were built, the one side was the Warren M Heath building, and the other one was the William Walrund building. All right. So Warren M. Heath succeeded his father, Isaac Heath, as the owner of a furniture store and undertaker's business that had been established in Libertyville in 1880. Early furniture makers were often undertakers because building caskets was a natural extension of their business. Referred to as the Napoleon of Commerce by the local paper, in 1903, Heath erected the largest store building in Libertyville at the time, seen here on the right. The Queen Anne style commercial block cost $9,000, which is a little over $263,000 today. The store occupied the south part of the building, and the north section was home to the post office. And you can just barely on the right-hand side of this picture see the post office sign. He served as postmaster from 1897 until 1908, so it was nice to have the post office in his building. This is a good view of the two buildings right next to each other. The Heath building is the darker colored one, and the Walrund building is painted a lighter color. So even though you see those buildings today are right next to each other, they were built separately. O.I. Luce, R.C. Higgins, and G.T. Luce purchased the Heath business and building in 1907, and the furniture store operated as O.I. Luce and Company on the south end with a harness shop on the north. In 1908, a bowling alley, billiard room, and barbershop with public baths opened in the basement of the building, which at that time had direct access from the street. Pool and billiard tables, porcelain tubs, and a stock of cigars, tobaccos, and soft drinks attracted customers. You can just see the bowling and billiard sign at the bottom of these front windows right next to the stairwell going down to the basement from the sidewalk. In 1923, Ray Furniture and Paints, also undertaking, bought out the Luce store and expanded their business, which had been established in the 400 block of Milwaukee Avenue earlier in the century. The Ray store moved to the Luce location shortly thereafter and purchased the building 3 years later. The bowling alley and billiard room still operated in the lower level at that time. Professional offices, such as those of optometrist Dr. W.W. Dietrich, physician F.H. Martin, and attorney Lyle Morris, used the third floor of the building for the first 20 years of the building's life. When Ray leased part of the building in 1993 to James Flegelman, a Russian Jewish immigrant and owner of a dry goods store that was across the street, the new Flegelman's department store commandeered the basement to provide 2 floors of shopping. Ray continued the undertaking business in the south end of the building and his furniture business on the 2nd floor. The undertaking business later moved to 120 West Park Avenue and is today the Burnett Dane Funeral Home. The furniture business continued on Milwaukee Avenue until the mid-1940s when Ray retired from the retail business. Flegelman's then claimed the 3rd floor and became the Libertyville store with the most retail space. Flegelman's closed in the late 1950s. Taylor and Seiler Paint and Hobby moved in and utilized the building through the early 1960s. Standard floor covering occupied the basement level at one point, and for a little while, the Langworthy's department store next door expanded into the building just for a few years. Over the next 40 years, several businesses would occupy the Heath building, including Jam's Discount Pharmacy, shown here in a mid-1970s photo. Current residents Touche Salon and Charles and Minerva arrived in 2002 and 2004, respectively. So right next door was the William Rallwind grocery. William Rallwind established a meat market in Libertyville in 1893. He constructed the 2-story building now at 541 North Milwaukee Avenue in 1903. When the new grocery store opened, it featured, quote, fine woodwork and the facilities for carrying on businesses such as modern computing scales, a giant refrigerator, etc. His business continued to grow, and a rear addition was constructed in 1906 to expand the store's ice house and refrigeration capabilities. Another rear addition, completed sometime before 1912, added more storage. Gallagher Heating Company operated out of this rear addition in the 1950s, and Curtis Frame Back Alley Gallery currently occupies the space. And you can sort of see the interior. This is a picture from 1903. So about Lauren closed the shop sometime after 1936. Smith Shoes, established by Ray N. Smith in 1917, remodeled the building and moved from across the street in August 1940. After Ray Smith's retirement in 1961, his sons Alan and Jerry continued the business. Alan Smith passed away in 1987. When Jerry retired in 1995, a 45-year run for the family-owned business, which served multiple generations of Libertyville residents, ended at this location. On a personal note, I'll never forget the light blue Keds with rainbow stripes that my mom bought me in 8th grade at Smith's Shoe Store. In 1995, Millennium Art Gallery owner Lori Towner began remodeling space for use as an art gallery and school. To her surprise, she found relics of the Walrond store behind the walls. Workers uncovered a brass latch while demolishing the back wall, and further removal of the wall revealed a bank of oak ice boxes with beveled glass that have been painted over. The ice boxes are no longer there, and bathrooms now occupy that space. Millennium Art Gallery provided display space for local artists as well as art classes for all ages until it closed in 2001. The current occupant, Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory, opened in 2002. All right, we're gonna go up the street a little bit, a couple of blocks, to 715 North Milwaukee Avenue, which is today's American Legion Hall. All right. Apologize. Okay. So we know this today as the American Legion Hall, but it began its life as the Town Hall or Township Hall. Township government was established in Illinois in 1850. Libertyville Township government originally met in the local schoolhouse, which was located close to where the picnic basket is today. In 1860, the township purchased the 1845 Congregational Church building, which sat on the same lot as the current building and held meetings there. But by the 1890s, they needed more space. And at the April 1894 annual township meeting, a building committee of 3, Martin Melody, J.E. Holcomb, and Ansel B. Cook, who was elected chairman, were elected to oversee the construction of the town hall. A motion was passed to build a brick, one-story building with a basement. Architect William W. Boynton and builders William D. and Frank Price of Chicago, all business associates of Mr. Cook, were granted the building contracts. The ceiling, cupola, and cornices were to be imported German sheet stamped metal and installed by the local Fred F. Bishop Company. The old building was sold to R.W. Stafford and moved to the corner of Church Street and 2nd Street for use as a pickle factory. The new building cost $3,500, which is about $104,000 today, and was completed in early August, just 4 months after it was commissioned. On August 25th, 1894, the Lake County Democratic Convention was the first event held in the new hall. Over the years, it has hosted Libertyville Township annual meetings, local political conventions, lectures, and entertainment, and local organizations could rent the hall for agricultural exhibits, rehearsal and performance space, dances and balls, and suppers and banquets. Local veterans founded the American Legion Post 329 in the fall of 1919. Originally, they met at the Village Hall, but in 1925, the American Legion signed a 25-year lease with Libertyville Township for the use of the Town Hall building. The Township would continue to use the building as before, with the American Legion taking responsibility for its upkeep. The lease was renewed for an additional 50 years in 1948. Exterior changes over the years include the removal of the deteriorating cupola in the mid to late 1940s and the construction of a one-story annex on the south side of the building in 1949. This may also be when the original front door was replaced by the classical entry with dental cornice and triangular pediment that we see today. In 1973, the American Legion purchased the building for $35,000. Libertyville Township continued to use the hall until 1982, when they moved to a new building on Merrill Court. A replica cupola was installed in November 1996. The south side addition, which had been constructed of concrete block, was covered in brick cladding during that same time period. And in 2002, 26 layers of paint were removed from the exterior to expose the original brick. And that is the town hall. And I'm now going to turn it over to Melissa as we travel across the street.
Okay. Hello, I'm Melissa Phillips, and I am very excited to talk to you today about the Liberty Theater. And partly because this building has a special place in my heart. Jenny, if you want to show the slide of the Liberty Theater. It's got a special place in my heart because my dad worked for the Liberty Theater and its parent company for about 30 years. So I pretty much grew up here. So the Liberty Theater has been in this spot for 80 years. And when it was constructed, it was the first commercial building in Libertyville with air conditioning. And later, it was also the site of a world premiere of a movie in 1942. So the the theater was the brainchild of a man named Frederick William Dobie, who engaged some Chicago architects in 1937 to design a theater, quote, befitting a town of Libertyville's stature. Construction started in 1937, and you can see here in the larger picture the start of construction with the Village Hall that Jenny just talked about. The Village Hall's in the background. In the Illinois Digital Archive, this machine in the front is described as a steam tractor. I can see the steam part, but that looked like a crane to me, but I don't know my construction equipment from 1937. So you'll also see in the smaller image of the Independent Register that the building stole the front page headline in the Independent Register for 2 weeks prior to the opening. And in this image, this is the souvenir edition that was published August 26, 1937. You can see that a little bit at the top. In the image, you will see that there's this large Art Deco marquee, and that there's these cream-colored exterior walls, which was terracotta. So as I mentioned, the local newspaper published a souvenir edition. Local businesses took out full-page ads welcoming the new movie house. And there was even an editorial that proclaimed, quote, Libertyville this week takes another step forward. And merchants offered their opening sales, and they also had a window trimming contest. So if we go to the next slide, you will see a much better image of that majestic Art Deco facade. I mean, if you look at the cars in the picture as well, you can just see how enormous that was, and you can get a good idea of the cream-colored terracotta walls. And then you'll also see a very large sign that's as large as almost the entire, you know, the marquee where they have the names of the movies, advertising the air conditioning. So that was pretty important stuff. So the building opened on August 27th, 1937. There was a capacity crowd on both of the Friday nights. It was a 700-seat theater, so that was a big crowd, especially, you know, for Libertyville in the 1930s. At the opening events, a key to the theater was presented to the mayor, Mayor A.E. Suter, and there were other local dignitaries who spoke. The opening movie was called Slave Ship, and it starred Warner Baxter, Wallace Beery, Elizabeth Allen, and Mickey Rooney. Now, the interior of the theater was just as impressive as the exterior. The lobby walls were covered with satinwood veneer, and there were red carpet aisles going down into the theater. In addition to the manager, Robert Collier, the employees included a cashier, a ticket taker, 4 ushers, and janitors. Now, speaking of employees, anytime you have a conversation about Liberty Theater, the topic of Marlon Brando is going to come up. Marlon Brando, the famous actor, worked at the Liberty Theater for some period between 1939 and 1941. We're not sure exactly when. And in his autobiography, Brando tells a story about working at the theater. Apparently, he did not like the uniforms because they made him too hot. So he cut the front of his button-down shirt, cut the front of it off and the sleeves, and he affixed the front of the shirt to the inside of his jacket so he could button it up, and he sewed the cuffs onto the bottom of his sleeve so it looked like he was really wearing a shirt and a jacket, but he was only wearing one layer. But one of his co-workers ratted him out, and Brando was fired. But he had the last word, however. In his autobiography, he recounts his revenge. Apparently, he states he chopped up rotting broccoli, mixed it with Limburger cheese, and stuffed it into the intake pipe of that wonderful new air conditioning, which ended up having the effect of emptying the theater. The person who fired him never figured out who, the person who ratted on him never figured out who did it, that he did it, but I guess we now all know because he confessed in his autobiography. So if we go to the next slide, we will talk about something slightly more patriotic. The Liberty Theater played a really large role in very strong World War II bond sales, war bond sales in Libertyville. In 1942, Robert Collier, who was still the manager of the theater, was also the co-chairman of the local war bonds campaign. And so Collier arranged for actor James Cagney to make an appearance in Libertyville in support of a bond rally. And in the larger picture, you'll see that's a picture of James Cagney with Spencer Tracy highlighting the campaign that would involve movie theaters and bond sales. That's, of course, not at the Liberty Theater. That's just about the campaign. So on the evening of September 3rd, 1942, Cagney arrived to a very large crowd in Cook Park. During that event, Libertyville residents purchased $110,625 in war bonds. That is the equivalent of about $1.75 million in our money today. So based on that success, Libertyville was selected to be one of the sites of a movie premiere of Desperate Journey. And you can see the poster there that starred Errol Flynn, Ronald Reagan, and Raymond Massey. So the cost of admission for the premiere was to the purchase of a war bond ranging from $25 to $500, with the higher prices for better seats. So no movie stars were in attendance at the September 23rd event, but the night had a Hollywood flair. There were crowds of people lining Milwaukee Avenue while the high school band played. The guest of honor was Illinois Governor Dwight R. Green, who arrived in a horse and carriage that was loaned for the evening by John Cuneo. This event was also a big success, with Libertyville citizens purchasing another $40,000 in war bonds, which is the equivalent of about $636,000. So Libertyville was, did a wonderful job in supporting the war bond drive. So now we're going to go to the next slide, which is a much more familiar building facade. That's the one we see today, more or less. In the late 1960s, the Liberty Theater was operated by a company called Ryan Theaters, and they owned several theaters in Lake County, including the Grays Lake Drive-In and the McHenry Drive-In, which is actually still in operation. In 1968, Hank Ryan, who was the kind of patriarch of the family, embarked on, quote, a vast remodeling program at the Liberty Theater. And that included, in its modernization, sadly, I think, the removal of the Art Deco marquee. And then in the 1980s, the large single auditorium was divided into two smaller viewing areas. In 2012, a young man actually named Scott Dean purchased the theater business, not the theater or the property, but the business. And then in 2014, he upgraded to a more modern technology with the purchase of 2 digital projectors at the cost of $130,000. Now, this was more than just, he wasn't just trying to have the latest technology. First run movies and movie studios, they were phasing out actual film. The movies used to come on these enormous platters of film. They were phasing those out, and digital projectors were required. So if he didn't buy the projectors, he wouldn't have been able to show the movies. The building and the property were still owned by the Ryan family, who announced in 2017 that they were putting the building and the property up for sale as, quote, a redevelopment opportunity. The theater remained open until January of this year. And since the announcement about the sale of the property, there have been a number of local individuals and organizations who have been trying to figure out plans for purchasing the property and keeping the building as a movie theater or a multi-purpose building. Libertyville Mayor Terry Wepler was involved in discussions to save the building and apparently was close to an agreement, according to a report that we read. However, the COVID-19 crisis brought that whole process to a halt. So, as you drive through town, you will see that it still has the for sale sign on the front of the theater. So now we're going to move quite a few blocks down the street, down Milwaukee Avenue to the south, and we're going to come to another very prominent building, which is on the corner of Milwaukee and Cook. And this is called the Skank Building. And you can see the name, you can see it faintly there, is still inscribed on the front of the building. It looks like it should say Shank, but it is pronounced Skank. So this is interesting. In the other, the other parts of the discussion, we heard about businesses that had, buildings that had a lot of different businesses going in and out. But this store here had hardware stores anchoring the front of this building for at least 80 years. The building was originally sited on a piece of land that was occupied by what was called the Sprague home. It was a private home. George Skank wanted this piece of land, so he had the house moved. He bought the land and had the house moved in order to construct a new building for his expanding hardware business. And then, as I said, for 80 years, various hardware stores have been at this corner. So if we go to the next slide, I'm first going to tell you a little bit about George Skank. The Skank family, they were among the earliest settlers in Libertyville. And George Skank was born just west of Libertyville in 1837, and he started a hardware and farm implements business here in 1870, keeping in mind that Libertyville was very much farmland in the area. So he was originally on the west side of Milwaukee Avenue across the street, and that store was actually the site of a very important meeting in the history of Libertyville commerce. In October of 1878, in that building, there was a committee met to discuss bringing train service to downtown Libertyville, and George Skank was the chairman of that committee. Train service was eventually established, and the first load of freight on the train line in 1880 included a carload of reapers for Skank's store. So in 1882, as I mentioned, he purchased property on the east side of Milwaukee Avenue, moved the house, and laid out what was called Skank's Addition, which was Sprague Street, which is now Cook Street, from Milwaukee to First Street in 1882. So that's from Milwaukee to just past the police station on Cook Street. So at that time, around that time, he built a framed double front store building, and that's what you see here on the northeast corner of Milwaukee Avenue in Sprague. So that's a nice double front wooden building. And he also constructed a farm implement warehouse in the rear. He carried the largest stock of hardware and farming implements in Lake County there. And he also added a grain elevator and opened up a lumber yard. Well, Like many other things, this nice wooden store burned down in August 30th, 31st, 1895, when the Great Libertyville Fire broke out, either in or behind his building. So he lost the building, he lost his inventory, but he was down but not out. So he operated out of temporary quarters until at least July 1897, when he sometime around there when he built a new brick building. We know it wasn't before July 1897 because we have something called Sanborn fire insurance maps that show all the buildings in a particular area at different intervals of time. And his new building, doesn't show up on the 1897 Sanborn map. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that brick building on the corner there. And so this is the 1930s, but by 1903, his store was the largest of its kind in Lake County. And patrons could buy, quote, builder's hardware and tools, wire fencing and farming tools, and implements of the latest and most approved kinds, wagons, buggies, and carriages of the finest rubber tires and exclusive makes. I just realized that probably makes him the first car dealer in Libertyville. So that's another claim to fame, I guess. Jenny will correct me if I'm wrong about the history of that. So Gordon and Louis Skank, who were the sons of George, took over the business in the early 1900s, and it incorporated as Skank Hardware. In 1915, Louis Skank was the president, and Ralph Bulkley was the secretary and manager of the store. So it continued on for many years as a hardware store, but that was mostly in the north side of the building. In the south side of the building, and if you go to the 1955 slide, you'll see on the awning there it says Thompson. For many years, other buildings shared that south side storefront, while the hardware, and you can even see faintly on the awning on the south side, it says Skank Hardware. The north side, there were lots of different kinds of businesses. Thompson was a clothing store, and that's a men's clothing store, and that was in that space during the 1950s. The second floor served a variety of purposes. You can see there's a sign there for King Loan, which was there. Also, in the second floor of the building in 1906, high school classes were housed there. They replaced a pool hall and a bowling alley, which is an interesting transition, I think. Another business that was there was the publishing arm of what was called Arthur Sheldon's The Sheldon School, which was a kind of a commercial business school. And that became so successful that he ended up moving to the site of what is now the Mundelein Seminary. Not the big buildings, of course, of the seminary, but that land. So if we go to 1956, you'll see that some architectural changes happened in the mid to late 20th century. And in the spring of 1956, the building was cut back from the street about 5 feet to conform to village codes. And again, modernization strikes, and the facade was remodeled in a more contemporary style. And also the two storefronts, the separate storefronts, north and south, were paired together into one main storefront. And you can see very faintly that the original Skank plaque is still on that second floor niche right there. So early in the 1960s, Paul Hess, who was the operator of the Ace Hardware, which was next door and had been next door to the Skank Hardware for many years, next door in the Eager building, he purchased Skank Hardware and consolidated the two businesses in the Skank building. So Ace Hardware was there until 1966 when they opened a new and expanded store at 155 Peterson Road, where they are still. So in the late 1960s and early 70s, Chandlers Stationery store was in business. And just again, personally speaking, I loved Chandlers as a kid and a teenager. They had like a bookstore in the back and all kinds of wonderful stationery. It was great. And then Capitol Music was there in the 1980s. Now, currently, Rollins Jewelers occupies the first floor of the building. And to go back to this image, you can see that in the 1990s, refurbishment was done at the front of the store to return back to a style closer to the original. And you can even see that there was addition at the top of and at the middle of the building of a cornice, which was actually made of decorative polyurethane. It was not made of stone. So that is the Skank building in downtown Libertyville. We will move on to our next building.
All right. So I'm Heather Johnson, and I'm going to share our last two lots for the evening. They're both on the east side of Milwaukee Avenue, and they're both in the 400 block, which is between Cook Avenue and Church Street. So the first one is 416 North Milwaukee Avenue, which is most recently where Indian Motorcycles was. But before that, the first known business building on the site was a wooden frame structure owned by Francis and Martha Protein in the 1880s. And in this image, it's the building on the far right side with the false front. And this image is actually taken before the 1895 fire that we were talking about. So not all these buildings burned, but they're definitely all gone now. So if they don't look familiar to you, that's why. So Martha Ann Davis grew up in Libertyville, and she married Francis Frank Protein in 1874. They bought this building, and she operated a millinery business on the south or right-hand side of the building, while Frank, some might say romantically, operated his tinsmith shop on the left side. In the next image, it shows the building a little bit later, and these buildings are still standing, so this street scene might look more familiar to you. So where that restaurant sign is, the Protein building is just to the left there. After Frank died in 1905, Martha Protein continued running her millinery and dressmaking business, but she also leased out the other spots in that building. So she became the landlady, and she was no pushover either. In 1909, she actually had to take one of her tenants to court to sue him for back rent. He owed her $60. A young man named Clarence Flagg had a barbershop on the premises, and he actually owed other merchants in town some money too. So she took him to court, and the newspaper reported that the pool tables and other fixtures that had been ordered for the shop had to be returned to Chicago, because obviously barbershop wasn't just going to get your hair cut and a shave in those days. Then in 1914, after 30 years in business, Martha Protein sold her shop to A.W. Wlinderoth, which you can see in this ad, promptly advertising as the successor to Mrs. Protein, which says a little bit about her cachet that she's earned over the years, that her name was used for the next person in charge of the business. The building eventually became the last frame structure on Milwaukee Avenue in this downtown section in Libertyville, before being torn down sometime in the 1940s. Then the lot was empty for a while. It was used for parking and some village events until the A&P grocery chain announced plans to build on the site. So A&P stands for the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, and it was a pretty big grocery chain for a while. And it had been operating in Libertyville previously, but this was going to be a building that they built purposely for their uses. So the building was finished in 1949, and it's the one that's there today. So it's a single-story brick building. It has the big windows across the front, and it's just one storefront. Interestingly, in my opinion, this building has actually only housed 3 businesses total since it was built, and each have been completely different than the others. So when it opened, the A&P supermarket was actually pretty cutting edge, offering self-service grocery shopping, which was new at the time. But over time, it struggled to keep up with the supermarkets that were becoming more popular and with some of its competitors. It completely remodeled its interior in 1963, but in 1973, it finally gave up and closed this location. And in the next image, I'm going to point out on the right-hand side of this building, you'll notice the free parking entrance. So that was where people who were shopping there would park. There was an alley between O'Toole's and the building we're talking about where people could get to the parking in the back. And as you may have guessed, the next business to occupy the building is Ardens. And it was a fixture in Libertyville for 37 years. It was a family-owned business. It got its start in Chicago in 1958 before moving up to the suburbs, remodeling this building and opening in 1974. It had furniture showrooms, which were displayed in the big windows in the front, and offered full decorating services. So you could pick out your furniture suite, and then they would also help you figure out what rugs and paint and wallpaper so you could get your whole room done while you were there. And it was finally the economic downturn in 2008 that did in the business. It just couldn't bounce back, and the mother and son owners, Mike Main and Carol Davidovic, closed the doors in 2011. They liquidated their stock and sold the building. In 2015, so it was vacant for a few years there, but in 2015, Indian Motorcycles took a lease on the building. They completely remodeled the interior again, making a repair shop in the back and then using the front for their showroom. And it was one of the only Indian motorcycle dealerships in the Midwest. And it just closed recently, just this May. All right, and then our next address is just down the street on the corner of Milwaukee Avenue and Church Street, where Murphy's Health Food and Juice Bar and DeVille's Pizzeria are, if you want to show the next slide. So right there on the corner. And this history is going to sound very similar to the one I just told you. It starts with a millinery shop and a frame building. It has an empty lot in the middle, and it ends with a single-story brick building, but it is a different story. So the wooden frame building, seen in this next image, marks the corner of Church Street in Milwaukee, and Church Street was called Orchard Street in those days. So yeah, it's right there where Jenny's highlighting it. You can just see it on the edge of the right hand side of the picture and where that tree is, and the tree's right on the corner. And that building was built around 1875, and it housed a millinery business that was being run by Mrs. M.H. Seavey. A few years later, in 1882, the business was purchased by Carolyn and Henry Hurlbut. And the Hurlbuts are pretty well known in town. Henry was very involved with different village events and was on the board for a while. He owned some property in town, and there's actually a street in town still named for them. Hurlburt Street is actually a slight corruption of the name Hurlbut, and it's named after them. So Caroline Hurlbut took on the millinery business that was in the building. And she was just down the street from Mrs. Protein that we talked about with the last building. So just a few buildings down there is Mrs. Protein's building. Caroline was in business for 26 years. And after she retired in 1909, Henry decided to move the frame building around the corner and down Church Street, saying that it was too antiquated for any new business, but too good for wrecking. And he was hoping to open up this corner in downtown Libertyville for new development. However, that development ended up being a really long time in coming. The lot stayed empty with only a few documented attempts of people planning to build on it. Much later, in 1923, the Libertyville Masonic Lodge acquired the property from Caroline Hurlbut, and apparently they had plans to erect a 3-story temple on the property. But we know that they didn't. They actually ended up building over on Brainerd. And then a little later in 1929, it was purchased along with several other lots in this block by a syndicate of businessmen hoping to redevelop the whole area. And those plans also never happened. So in the next image, we jump ahead in the future, and this is the Libertyville in the 1930s or 40s, and where that Libertyville Days sign is in the far distance is where the lot is, and you can still see the same tree there on the corner of Church in Milwaukee. So it was just empty for years and years and years. And then the next image shows it just a little bit later during World War II, when they actually erected a roll of honor for servicemen in Libertyville. It's a little hard to see, so we're going to zoom in. And it looks like it was just kind of a billboard that they put up, and it had a list of all the names of the men serving in World War II. Finally, in 1956, a building was put on the site. It was a 1-story brick building, and it had 2 storefronts, 400 and 404 North Milwaukee Avenue. The first occupant of 404 was Julian's Menswear, which opened in 1956, and it's there on the left-hand side of this photo. And the newspaper declared that a stylish informality prevails at Libertyville's newest men's store. Julian's was going to offer low-pressure sales and casual shopping, which I interpret to mean self-service and possibly off the rack, as opposed to going in and being waited on by the proprietor of the store. Jay's Shoes opened next door in the corner spot in the same year, 1956. And it featured well-known brands of the time, such as Red Cross, Penobscot, Stride Right, Nurembush, and Portage. Over time, Julian's became Julian Redmond's after joining with another men's clothing store. Jay's Shoes became Geske Shoes, which is another Lake County company, and then later Fenwick Shoes, which is what you see in this image here. And on the side of the building is a sign that says Florsheim Shoes. And if you don't know, the Florsheim family owned the property where the Jewel on South Milwaukee Avenue is today. In the 1990s, The building was occupied by Magic Touch Cleaners, which moved in where Julian's was, and they were there for 22 years, from 1991 to 2013. Horoscope Hair Designs and Nail Salon, owned by Margie Allen, was on the corner. The corner was then briefly occupied by Baird Warner Realty, and then today, the two stores are occupied respectively by DeVille Pizza and Provisions, which opened in 2014 after a very heavy renovation from changing it over from a dry cleaners. And then the corner is occupied by Murphy's Health Foods and Juice Bar, which opened in 1996.
All right, so we showed you about 8 buildings that are up and down Milwaukee Avenue. As I mentioned at the start, this is actually just a selection of what's available through our new tour, which is available online at the address on this screen. And I believe Melissa is going to post that in the chat, so you can go directly from there. It is also available as an app. So there is a Clio, Your Guide to History app that is available through the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. So you can download that to your phone. When you're using the app, the easiest thing to do is search for 60048 and then scroll down to the Walking Tours and Heritage Trails section. We invite you to give this a try while you are out and about. You can also use the site to sort of look up a particular building. If you are maybe eating out and you want to find out about that particular building, you can do that without having to take the entire tour as well. And we do hope that if you have additional information or memories of these buildings or photographs of these buildings, we would love for you to share them with the Historical Society. What's really nice about this platform for the tour is that we can update these entries at any time as more information becomes available. And we hope to do further tours and in the future featuring different themes and different buildings around downtown. Just a couple of upcoming programs I want to let you know about, and then we'll see if there's any questions. This is the first of our 3 History Matters series this fall. Our next one is on October 19th, when Dale Eggert, who is an LHS graduate, retired teacher, and the current head wrestling coach at Libertyville High School, will present highlights from his recent book, Libertyville High School Athletic History, The First 100 Years. And then on November 29th, Lori and I will be back to talk about Gentlemen Farmers of Lake Forest and Libertyville. Both of those are available for registration right now. You can register through the library's website or by calling the library, and someone here will be able to get you onto those programs. So with that, I'm just going to take a quick look in the chat.
Jenny,
yes, go ahead.
This is Heather. Someone had a question earlier about how to find this recording on YouTube later.
Sure. So it'll be a couple of different places. First of all, I have everybody's email address. If you registered for the program, I was going to send it to everyone who registered, whether they attended or not. So you will get an email with the link. It will also be posted on the Libertyville-Mundelein Historical Society's webpage. That's another place to find the link. My plan is to have it up within the next week. It might be tomorrow if I'm especially efficient. But that's the best way. And if you don't receive it, contact me at the library and I'll make sure you get it.
Jenny, just FYI too, there was another suggestion that we do a history of Bush School.
Oh, I see that.
Bush Road. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We do have information in our collection from Bush School as well, so that might be a good, another good tour or a good blog post along the way too. Thank you for that suggestion. All right, are there any other questions? Okay, well, it looks like we went just about an hour. We really appreciate you, again, taking your time to learn about local history, and we hope that you will go ahead and take the tour. It's a little chillier now, but hopefully we'll still have some good days this fall where you can get out and take a nice walk around downtown. Feel free to share this with your friends. The more that can take the tour, the better. We hope that everyone gets a chance to take it this fall, even when there's snow or in next spring. If there's no other questions, thank you again, and we'll see you in October, hopefully. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.